What's going on, guys? So today I want to talk about a very important aspect when it comes to psychological development. Essentially, it's how you might mess up the relationship with the ego and the self. So if you think about the ego, just to simplify it, we can think about it just as the voice that talks as you in your head, right? Like I kind of thing. And the self is essentially the entirety of your inner world. It's comprised of, your personal consciousness, personal unconscious, the collective unconscious, and all the different archetypes that might exist within the psyche. The concept that I want to talk about is known as inflation alienation, right? So this occurs when the ego over-identifies with the self, the contents of the self and the contents of the psyche. Um, and essentially, you start to think that you're kind of special. It shows up in grandiosity, that you're like this chosen one, right? And eventually, at this point, right, you face a certain failure or rejection, and then the ego deflates and you fall into alienation, which can be kind of meaninglessness. You're disconnected from the self. You kind of don't know what happened to the person that was experiencing that kind of specialness or a connection to a higher self. Um, and essentially, the way that this kind of repairs itself is that you accept the higher self as a bigger whole than the ego, and you kind of get brought down to size, I guess, essentially. And a good example I think about this, a good archetype for this would be, the tech founder who's like, oh, I'm a visionary, I'm going to change the world, right? Maybe like Elizabeth Holmes or Sam Bankman-Fried, they're coming out and they're changing an entire industry and they get their ego so inflated. And then eventually something happens, people find out that they're, defrauding investors or their customers or anything like this, and they kind of have that alienation type period, right? That disconnection from self. So those are kind of extreme examples, but this process typically happens, towards for most people, where they kind of get brought down to their right size and start to have more of a healthier relationship with self. But yeah, next up, I'm going to talk about more of an externalized version of this because the ego, inflation, and alienation process is something that happens within your own psyche. But there is another related concept, which I started to talk about in my previous video on differentiation, but I'm going to provide a little bit more color around that in terms of how that ego inflation, alienation dynamic can happen in the external world. So you can see the initial video up here. Go check that out if you haven't. But other than that, I'll catch you guys later.